Hello friends. It's a beautiful overcast day here in Iowa, which sounds like the perfect day of fishing for me. You know, as I was walking along these trails, I began to wonder, where exactly did the fishing pole come from? I know where this fishing pole came from, the Cabela's in Minnesota, but the fishing pole as a whole, well friends, join me as we explore the long and worldwide history of the fishing pole on this episode of Angler Archives. Many historians have different answers to when the first fishing rod appeared. Some claim there are Chinese accounts of fishing with a rod as far back as 4000 BC. However, most fishing historians will agree upon a 2000 BC date, thanks to archaeological records from ancient Greece, the Roman Empire, Macedonia, Trinidad, and China. Thanks to advancements in hook technology, which we'll cover in another video, people needed a better way to cast their hooks into the water. The first rendition of the fishing pole is described as the cane pole. These poles were made out of wood, mostly Tonkin bamboo, calculated reed, or ash wood, as it was necessary that they may be light, tough, and pliable. These wooden rods had lines tied to the end of the pole, with a gorge hook attached to the other end of the line. Most of these early rods were about 6 feet in length, with the line being about the same length as the pole. These simple rods were used throughout many different ancient civilizations. We also see evidence of early versions of the fishing pole in ancient Greece and Rome as well. There are accounts of these rods around 900 and 400 BC. These were made from Arundo donax, a Mediterranean native plant. For smaller rods, a plant known as ferula might have been the source. Juniper or cornel wood, a slender hardwood, might have also been used. The lines for these rods were made from either horsehair or finely woven flax. These rods were also joined as well. This was done by either string or tiny pieces of metal known as ferulas. Finally, the bronze hook was not tied on. Instead, the top of the hook extended over the string in a sheath to keep fish from biting through the line. Some of the earliest accounts of fly fishing can also be found during this time period as well. The bait used for the first versions of fly fishing were a piece of red wool with rooster feathers attached. The feathers resembled a fly's wings with a waxy color to the fish, and they helped keep the bait afloat as well. As with the cane pole, the line had to be pulled by force. A great quote from Dionysus can be found during this period as well, stating, "An angler with 2 rods, 4 hooks apiece, and an assistant could catch more fish than a net if good bait is used." While the cane pole in the ancient Greece and Rome versions were pretty neat, and I'm sure they were a technological feat at the time, they did have their drawbacks. These drawbacks would later be fixed by different means, but the fishing pole stayed mostly the same for many centuries. In 1496, we get a treatise of fishing with an angle. At this point in time, the fishing line was still tied to the top of the fishing pole. However, they were getting slightly more elaborate in their designs, albeit still basically performing the same as the cane pole, just more flexible at the top in the middle. Now, I'm paraphrasing here, and huge props to the Sports Illustrated Vault for providing a modern English version of this text, but these rods were designed with 3 separate parts. The bottom part, being the sturdiest, made of ash branch, willow, or hazel, described meaning to be as thick as your arm. This bottom section would be around 9 feet long and tapered down with a hole at the end. The middle section would be around 3 feet long, made of hazelwood, and fit into the hole made into the bottom part with an iron spike to help lock it into place. Finally, the top piece was also 3 feet long, made of blackthorn, crabtree, medlar, or juniper. This part was glued to the middle section. At the tip of this section is a loop of cords, and the fishing line is tied to this loop. Surprisingly, after hundreds of years, there's yet to be any guides or reels invented. It wasn't until the 1600s we started to see some major improvements to the fishing pole. In the early 1600s, a wire loop was attached to the end of the rod, allowing for a running line. Casting was also vastly improved as well. During this time, England is credited with the creation of the reel that we recognize today. By 1770, a rod with guides along the length for the line in a reel was in use. Interestingly enough, before the 1700s, recreational fishing was viewed as a hobby of the elite. It really wasn't until the commercialization of fishing products and the rapid increase of tackle builders across England in the 1700s did fishing become more accessible. Because of this, the Nottingham reel was designed, a wide wooden drum that gave line freely. This would become the model other designers used as a foundation for further development. With the dawn of the industrial globalization in the early 1800s, English reels began to make their ways overseas aboard ships with items bound for the United States. They would soon find their ways into the hands of certain watchmakers and metalworkers. One such watchmaker and silversmith from Paris, Kentucky, George W. Snyder, is credited with the first American-made design for his Kentucky reel. Unfortunately for Snyder, he did not have any protections in place on his intellectual property. Because of this, the reels were soon adapted by Benjamin F. Meek, John Millam, and Clarence Gale, as well as many other tackle builders at the time. These craftsmen, using their respective skill sets, helped to ramp up U.S. fishing reel production. Using their training in building complex gear structures, they developed modern fishing reels' first known drag system. Factories in the Northeast began to mass produce these reels, thus lowering the costs and creating an upswing in fishing as an American hobby. Because of this popularization, Americans continued to build on earlier reel designs as part of a constant race to produce a more profitable, high-performing product. Well, here we are, friends. The beginning of the 1900s. Things were looking bright, and then one of the many byproducts to come from World War II was fiberglass. You see, fishing rods had been getting lighter and lighter throughout the years, using different woods, different building techniques, but fiberglass brought something completely different to the table. They were much lighter and could withstand most fish. There's a fun little story of how fiberglass rods came to be that goes something like this. In 1946, Dr. Howald, a military researcher, needed to fix his broken split can rod and used a fiberglass tube to fix it. This then inspired the very first commercial fiberglass rods manufactured by the Shakespeare Company. Fiberglass rods helped further efficiencies and drove production prices even lower. Then entered the graphite rod. By 1973, the first graphite rods hit the market. Manufacturers Fenwick and Hardy both claimed to have developed the first graphite rods. Despite who may have made them first, within a few short years, more companies saw the potential in graphite rods, and they quickly became the preferred choice of anglers. Depending on the quality, today graphite seems to be the choice of the best fishing pole to buy, but fiberglass and a new composition of the two called carbon fiber are also common today. Well, friends, there you have it. Thanks for joining me today. If you've stuck with me thus far, I appreciate it very much. You know, sometimes I feel as though we tend to take for granted how lucky we are with the fishing poles we have today. Looking back at the long and worldwide history of the fishing pole makes me appreciate this piece of equipment that has aided in so many memories, and I hope it did the same for you as well. If there's anything fishing related you'd like to learn about, please let me know in the comments. And if you'd just like to learn more interesting fishing history stories, consider subscribing. I'd like to also take this time to thank John of Storyline Multimedia. Without him, none of this would be possible, and I would have no equipment to record with. So, thank you, John. Well, with that Midwestern of a goodbye over with, I wish you all the best. And until next time, I'm Matthew, and this has been the history of the fishing pole on Angler Archives.
Wonder where you are tonight, do you think